Hello and welcome, dear travellers, to Whispers from the Campfire, where the flames of our stories cast shadows on the unknown. I am your guide to the eerie and the unexplained, so gather round as we delve into tales that chill the spine and stir the imagination. Join us tonight as we talk about one of Australia's most haunted places, the Aradale Lunatic Asylum. Aradale Lunatic Asylum, located in Ararat, Victoria, was opened in 1867. It was one of the largest asylums in Australia, designed to house thousands of patients. The asylum was part of a trio of institutions known as the Ararat Lunatic Asylums. During this video, the terms lunatic and insane will be used. We recognise that today these are derogatory terms and agree as such, but are documenting on the history of Aradale and how they classed and identified their patients and inmates. The sprawling complex of Aradale was built in response to the increasing number of people considered to be lunatics during the Gold Rush era. With up to 70 buildings, Aradale was a self-sufficient institution, complete with its own gardens, farms, and even a morgue. It was designed to give patients a sense of purpose in their day-to-day, to act like a town within a town. It was built along with two other asylums, Willsmere or Kew, located in Kew, Melbourne, and Mayday Hills or Beechworth, located in Beechworth, Victoria. Aradale hoped to provide compassionate care to those suffering with mental illness. At the peak of its history, it stood as Australia's largest mental health facility, housing thousands of patients, but behind its grand facade lay a place of immense suffering and despair. Prior to the development of psychiatric hospitals, people deemed insane were placed in prison, which is hardly a suitable place to help those with mental illness. As such, the Victorian government decided to build asylums to help provide adequate care to this cohort of people. However, the care they received was not as glamorous or as appropriate as it should have been. For Aradale, building began in 1864. It was designed by G.W. Vivian and John James Clark, and was designed as an E-plan barracks, based on an old 1850s model of Colney Hatch in England. A few years later, in 1866, the guard house was added, despite patients already being in Aradale for over a year. Once complete, Aradale employed over 500 staff of nurses, doctors, groundsmen, cleaners, and kitchen staff. Patients admitted to Aradale consisted of those with conditions such as depression, postnatal depression, autism, anxiety, PTSD, and Down syndrome. However, many patients were admitted for reasons that today would seem absurd, such as melancholia, hysteria, or simply being too difficult. It wasn't hard to be diagnosed with a mental illness at the time in Victoria. It only required 2 signatures to be committed, and then 8 needed to be deemed sane enough to leave. And so you can see how the people who were admitted may not have actually had any sort of mental illness. Up until 1880, Aradale housed children as inmates with adults in the same ward. This was later changed to allow for children to have their own ward. At this time, mental illness was seen as a disease, something that could be eradicated or cured. They believed fresh air was the main cure. Victorians also believed mental illness was contagious, and so the asylum was built upon a hill away from the city. The asylum walls was designed so as to not appear like a prison. They did this by making what was known as ha-ha walls, which involves the construction of trenches on the hospital side and a flat plane on the other to prevent escapes, and have the appearance from the outside of low walls to avoid the impression that Aradale was a prison. On top of this, the asylum further housed criminals and those deemed too dangerous for society. They also realised, due to housing dangerous criminals, the asylum changed the old Ararat County Jail to what was infamously called J Ward. Construction of the jail commenced in 1859 and was officially opened in 1861 to hold roughly 40 incarcerated criminals, where they would also conduct executions. Later, in 1887, the jail was converted into a maximum security psychiatric ward for the criminally insane. Prior to this change, and post-conversion, Aradale was home to 3 executions. The first execution was of one Andrew Veary in 1870, who was hanged. The second execution was one Robert Francis Burns in 1883, who was also hanged. The third and final execution was of one Henry Morgan in 1884. The treatment of patients in Aradale was often harsh and inhumane, with severe mistreatment and neglect. Patients would be strapped to chairs, placed in hot or cold showers, placed in restraints, or even worse. The asylum later moved on to controversial practices, such as electroconvulsive therapy, lobotomies, and isolation. As the years went by, Aradale became notorious for its overcrowded conditions and the mistreatment of patients. Reports of abuse, neglect, and unmarked graves added to the dark legacy of this institution. By the time it closed in 1993, thousands of souls had passed through its doors, many of whom never left. Throughout its time, Aradale housed some truly noteworthy people, most of which died in the asylum, and could be the very spirits still haunting its passages. One of these patients, Charles Foussard, was a French-Australian who spent most of his life in the J ward. Charles worked on ships as a young man until 1899, when he deserted his ship, the St. Elizabeth, whilst docked at Sydney. He spent the next few years wandering around New South Wales, and later to Melbourne and then Adelaide. He would make money by doing the odd labouring job and through petty theft. Charles was admitted after murdering an elderly man by shooting him 5 times and stealing his boots. It was found at trial that Charles was deemed to be of unsound mind and prone to delusions. At his death in 1974, he spent over 71 years in custody, making him the longest serving prisoner in the world. Another patient, Gary Webb, came from a rough childhood. His father was a criminal and pedophile, and his mum was an alcoholic. Due to this, he was placed in an orphanage when he was 4 years old. He would later escape from legal custody at age 11, and began committing various crimes including larceny, making threats, and offences of dishonesty. When he was 13, he was diagnosed with a personality disorder with psychopathic traits, and later admitted to Aradale. He was officially diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, at which time he also began to self-mutilate through swallowing razor blades. He cut off part of his ears and his left nipple, injured his genitals, and hammered nails into his feet. At age 38, he committed suicide by ingesting razor blades that led to peritonitis, which is an inflammation of the peritoneum and a serious life-threatening condition. Carrying on to another patient, William Bill Wallace was a notorious inmate from J ward. He was incarcerated at 41 after he was suspected of shooting a man over a cigarette in 1926. Throughout his time, he refused to talk, and due to this he was deemed clinically insane. He did not have a sentence imposed on him, and when he refused to communicate, it ended with him being incarcerated until his death in 1989. A last noteworthy patient was Mark Chopper Reed. Mark Reed was considered an underground Australian icon with his signature handlebar moustache, and was portrayed by an Australian comedian, Heath Franklin. Mark was in prison due to a large criminal history. He was transferred to J ward from Pentridge due to orchestrating the removal of both his ears in 1978. Later it was found that he did this so he could leave H Division, in which he was an inmate. He only spent a few months in J ward before being transferred back to Pentridge, but still, knowing that he was in that facility is both eerie and interesting. Since its closure in 1993, Aradale is known as one of the most haunted places in Australia. Aradale's tragic history is filled with stories of untimely and mysterious deaths. Many patients were buried in unmarked graves, their identities lost to time. Visitors and paranormal investigators have reported countless encounters with the supernatural, from disembodied voices and shadowy figures to sudden drops in temperature and the feeling of being watched. The asylum cemetery is said to be a hotspot for paranormal activity, with apparitions and strange lights often reported by those who visit. But one thing is clear, the asylum's dark past seems to be manifesting in many chilling ways. So whether you're a skeptic or a believer, there's no denying the unsettling atmosphere that permeates this eerie place. Some of the ghosts reported to be experienced in the asylum consist of 1. Nurse Kerry. Kerry was a matron in the asylum. Some stories detail her as being a kind nurse, whilst others detail her as being the worst nurse in the asylum. She is said to haunt the women's wing, and visitors today state that they can have a feeling of eyes being fixated on them until they are compelled to leave the ward. Legend has it that she took her own life in one of the asylum's rooms after years of witnessing the horrors inflicted upon patients. Her restless spirit is often seen wandering the hallways, her presence felt by many who dare to enter. Governor Fidemont was the last governor of the Gaol. Another ghost, George Fidemont, was the last governor of the jail before it was changed to the asylum. George suffered a fatal heart attack whilst leading people down a stairwell in 1886. Today it is said that you can hear George's heavy footsteps and heavy banging in the area he passed. Today it is said that you can hear George's heavy footsteps and heavy banging in the area where he passed, but gaining proof of his happenings is difficult, as it does not usually occur with people present. Another eerie place in the asylum was the superintendent's office, with visitors often experiencing a bitter taste in their mouths while walking past. The explanation? A former superintendent died by suicide after swallowing prussic acid or hydrogen cyanide. While we don't know for sure who this is, according to reports, this could have been a Dr. William L. Mullen, who died in 1912. People have stated experiencing this taste and would not alleviate until they left the area. On one of the infamous places in the asylum, J Ward, a lot of stories come out of there, including one story that an inmate was murdered and dismembered in the governor's bathroom. Some people believe that the bathroom is now home to a demonic force, and that upon entering, one can experience an oppressive and almost palpable evil presence. So there's absolutely no denying that Aradale Asylum is home to a massive array of hauntings. Today, Aradale stands as a haunting reminder of this past. Tours of the asylum offer a glimpse into its grim history, allowing visitors to walk the same hallways as those who suffered within its walls. Whether you're a skeptic or a believer, there's no denying the unsettling atmosphere that permeates this eerie place. These are just some of the stories of ghosts and hauntings in the asylum, but there is a chance of many, many more, and each person could experience something different. So if you ever find yourself in Ararat, Victoria, and you're feeling brave, perhaps a visit to Aradale Lunatic Asylum is in order. But be warned, the whispers of the past are strong here, and the spirits may not be as welcoming as you'd hope. Thank you for joining me by the campfire. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more tales from the dark corners of history. Until next time, keep the fire burning and the stories alive.